Hi, my name is Daniel Goldmark. I'm a professor in the music department here at Case Western Reserve University, and I direct the university's Center for Popular Music Studies. It is my privilege to welcome you all to this evening's keynote lecture with Dave Marsh for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's annual Music Masters series. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to mention two upcoming events in this week honoring Smokey Robinson. You can see we've had quite a few things this week. There we are on the bottom. On Saturday, there will be a conference dedicated to the music and impact of Smokey Robinson, including interviews and panels with Dave Marsh, David Ritz, Harry Weinger, Andy Flory, Jason King, Mary Wilson, Martha Reeves, and Smokey Robinson himself. The conference is sold out, but you can stream the whole event live if you aren't going to be able to be there at rockhall.com. That evening, of course, there will be a tribute concert to Smokey Robinson featuring a wide array of musicians, including, and you can see them all here, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees Dennis Edwards, Martha Reeves, Mary Wilson, as well as artists including Avant, JoJo, the Robert Glasper Experiment, Michelle Williams, quite a few more, and an amazing house band led by Adam Blackstone. And I'm happy to announce that one more person fairly key to the Motown story has agreed to attend, and that's Berry Gordy. So it's going to be a great night. That's at, I'm not responsible in any way, but it's a really great thing. That's at 7:30 at the State Theater. Ticket information for the concert can be found at playhousesquare.org. I want to thank everyone at the Rock Hall, including Catherine, Jason, Casey, Lauren, and John, as well as Kelly Schimmelfennig, Lisa Chu, and Dean Cyrus Taylor, all from the College of the Office of the College of Arts and Sciences here at Case Western, for all their time and support for making this event and the ongoing sponsorship of Music Masters possible. It is my great pleasure to introduce this evening's keynote speaker, Dave Marsh. He was born and raised in the area about which he's going to speak at least a certain amount, Detroit, Michigan. At age 19, Dave helped to co-found and edit a magazine about rock and roll, which just happened to be based in that hometown. That was the magazine Cream, where he worked for 4 years. He went on to work for Newsday as their pop music critic. He joined Rolling Stone and became chief reviewer, feature writer, and columnist in 1975. He was a music critic for Playboy from 1985 to 2002, among many other posts that he's had. He's also the author or editor of 40 books on everything ranging from several books on Bruce Springsteen, Elvis, The Who, Sly and the Family Stone, books on Walden Woods, papers of Woody Guthrie, and issues of censorship, probably best represented by one of my favorite of his books, which explores the history and furor around the song Louie Louie. If you don't know this book, definitely check it out. And tonight, of course, he's going to be talking to us about Smokey Robinson. Please join me in welcoming Dave Marsh.
And lumdy-lumdy-lie to all of you. Very good. We've got at least one Smokey fan here. This picture behind me, this thing came out 50 years ago. I was 15. I've been thinking about this cover ever since. And if you actually see the cover smaller, you know those beautiful clouds that were over the lake today? It was like that, only they're red and they're pink and they're, you know, and and it kind of looked like a Jehovah's Witness tract about the imminent end of the world, but I determined at some time during my adolescence that this was the beginning of the world. And that's pretty much how I felt about Smokey Robinson and the Miracles my whole life since, well, actually before then even. And that's I don't know what it shows you, but that's what it shows me, you know, and there's another thing about that record, and this I think goes to how important Smokey and the group were to Motown, this was, I believe, the first two records set by an R&B artist, and I'm pretty sure there wasn't a rock band ahead of them. The Mothers of Invention's first album was a double disc. That was that winter, and Blonde on Blonde, which I believe was that fall. So I think this was, you know, and for Berry Gordy, who was pretty conservative about how he spent money on marketing, to put that together in that way reflects how important, and I'll get into that a little more. But the main thing about that cover is, to me, is it's beautiful, and that's what really the essence of Smokey Robinson's music, to me, is a very personal, very passionate, very controlled, very intelligent form of beauty. He's an artist, truly an artist. There was a thing Berry Gordy said when he got inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And you know, you can't talk about these guys separately because they're like best friends, for one thing. Or at least not entirely separately. But Berry said he was musing about, as he was being inducted into the Hall of Fame, how Marvin Gaye, he said, Marvin, you know, you would say to Marvin, do this or do that, and he would resist. And he would, you know, he'd have his own idea, and his own idea was way in left field. He said, as if this were the strangest thing in the world, Berry said, he was like an artist. Nobody would ever say that about Smokey Robinson because he just was. It's art, in my opinion, and I don't think Smokey thinks this way about it, from the conversations we've had. Smokey is an artist. What he does is not just sing songs and write them. He crafts them beautifully, and there's a vision behind all of it. And whether it's Mickey's Monkey, or The Tracks of My Tears, or Being With You, or for God's sake, Love Bath. It was his last R&B hit. And that was only 5 years ago when he was a mere 70. You know, there is a vision behind all of it. And that vision has something to do with that album cover, which I am sure Smokey had nothing to do with. But, you know, as often happens in pop music, some of these things are implicit and everybody gets them, and it comes out in kind of unexpected ways. I'm going to read a few things tonight that I didn't write. I might read something that I did write, but we'll see about that. I was trying to figure out how do you explain Smokey's persona to somebody, and I went and read an essay that my old friend Bob Christgau wrote in Newsday in about 1972 or 1973 about Smokey. And Bob is one of the few colleagues I have who love Smokey as much as I do. David Ritz, who's another one, is here, and Lauren Anke, who I think about as a colleague, I think feels the same way, and she's here too. Anyway, what Bob said was, even in the extremity of his pain, he remained modest, so that his impact never quite equaled his achievement or his reputation. He refused to assert his power over the audience. In fact, that was what was just so wonderful about him. Not only did his persona lack any nasty macho flash, but it was obviously only a projection. Maybe Smokey was helpless and unhappy, but William Robinson was a ridiculous success. The vice president of a major record company and happily married to a beautiful woman, I might add, who is at least as smart as he was, who is at least as smart as he is or anybody else in the room, with two kids, Barry and Tamla. Berry Gordy, Tamla's a record company. He is so nice he annoys interviewers, not me. What kind of copy can you get out of an ideal middle-class person? Yet that's what he is, intelligent, good-humored, compassionate, in love with his work and his family. I met Smokey just as the Miracles were breaking up, which was 1970, which is what, 45 years now? I have never seen anything publicly or when we've been talking that contradicts a word of what Christgau wrote there. And that's the person we're honoring this weekend. And I guess what I want to say about that is it's always a wonderful thing when you get to honor an honorable person who is also a great artist. And that's who we're dealing with. Now, everybody talks about Detroit when they talk about Motown, and Smokey's the one who wrote I Love Detroit. He actually charted that record, which is just something so weird. And it only charted on the R&B charts. It's just unfathomable. But that's how good he is. But Detroit was something, I think, even more important to black people than it was to white people. The white people, white working class people at least, were very loyal. Were very loyal to one another, the values, and that's a way in which the necessary values of working with each other in dangerous places like auto plants and you know, places with huge open furnaces and you know, ship them boxcars around and all those kinds of things that people did. That's a necessity. Black Detroit was a little different. Black Detroit had what's called, the main entertainment part was called Paradise Valley until the city tore it down to make well, actually the city and the U.S. government tore it down to make a freeway. And it shunted everybody over to the west side where there were already enough problems. And so Smokey and Motown came along at a time when Paradise Valley was becoming something more dangerous and complicated. And in my mind, at least, they represented, and they still represent, for me in many ways, the way out. And we'll get to more of that in a minute. Smokey himself came from a family of a father and a mother who loved one another and couldn't live together. He had two older sisters who loved the hell out of him. Somebody said to me today, well, you know, he was always sort of the spoiled child, but you know, what he was a beloved child. And that's a very special thing, and he carried that forward to the rest of us. And you know, he's don't mess with Bill, whose uncle called him Smokey because, you know, had green eyes or blue-green eyes and fair skin, and when he was a little boy he was blonde. So, you know, it's in Smokey's book that he did with David Ritz, you know, he says, well, it was his uncle's way of reminding him that he was in fact a black American, a black man. So, now before I get deep into the music, I need to say the following. Bad girl, shop around. What's so good about goodbye? I've been good to you. I'll try something new. Way over there. You really got a hold on me. A love she can count on. Mickey's monkey. I got to dance to keep from crying. I like it like that. That's what love is made of. Come on, do the jerk. Ooh, baby, baby. The tracks of my tears. My girl has gone. Going to a go-go. Choosy beggar. Whole lot of shaking in my heart. The love I saw in you was just a mirage. More love. If you can want. Yes to love. Special occasion. Baby, baby, don't cry. Doggone right. Point it out. The tears of a clown. I don't blame you at all. Crazy about the la la la. Satisfaction. We've come too far to end it now. Baby, come close. Baby, that's back at you. Quiet storm. Daylight and darkness. Cruising. Let me be the clock. Heavy on pride. Light on love. Being with you. Tell me tomorrow. Yes, it's you, lady. Just to see her. One heartbeat. Love bath. If I've left out your favorite, I apologize. Those are just the hits that Smokey and the Miracles had. Doesn't count anybody else. Doesn't count Since I Lost My Baby, possibly the most perfect record anybody ever made in R&B. Doesn't count the Mary Wells hits. Doesn't count his literal creation of the Temptations records. He did everything but sing on them. So those are the great records, and the people that he helped thrust themselves into stardom, including himself. And that's the legacy we celebrate this week. And by the way, I didn't mention "Don't Mess with Bill" idly. That was Marvelette's hit, but he wrote it. And we can't leave out of that equation the people he surrounded himself with. Motown's about family at one level, a very important level, and it's about community at an even broader level. And the Miracles are a good example of that. It was Smokey, Pete Moore, who's the only other living member, Ronnie White, who I really wish was here this week, because when I was a little boy rock and roll reporter, he was one of the people who made me feel like an actual person Well, a wonderful human being and a great writer. Co-wrote Tracks of My Tears with, no, I'm sorry. A whole, I'll get to everything correctly. I got to stop ad-libbing here. But anyway, Ronnie White was a great guy and co-wrote many of Smokey's hits. Marv Tarplin, the guitar player, co-wrote Tracks of My Tears. And Bobby Rogers, who is Claudette's brother, and Claudette herself. And these people were great singers. They collaborated, and Smokey collaborated with them on all these things. Smokey did a lot of work by himself, but he always collaborated. And that's not how we are taught to think even about musical artists. We have this whole image of the artist as this isolated individual. Even in music, which is the most collaborative art, you know, you go play your symphony by yourself, right? And Smokey is the paradigmatic of that. And in addition to the Mary Wells and the Temptations, who I did mention, you know, Smokey played a key role in Marvin Gaye's career. The Supremes, he's the one who brought Diane Ross to Motown. She was his neighbor down the street. So was Aretha Franklin, but she got somewhere else first. The Marvelettes he played a huge role with, and so on and on. That's one of the things this points out is how great Smokey's confidence was. You know, Berry Gordy tells a story of meeting him at Nat Tarnopol's office as Smokey and the Miracles were, I think were then the Matadors. Might have been the Chimes, but I think they were the Matadors already. And they get kind of tossed out. You know, you guys are too much like the Platters. Go try to be even more like the Platters or go away. And Smokey, Barry heard something in those songs that they had previewed. And so he came and tracked them down, and they go and they have a little meeting, just him and Smoke. And Barry's comments on it are fascinating, because what he said was, well, in the first thing he said, disappointment was hanging off him like his oversized pants. He reminded me of me. He got more excited with each criticism. I wanted to teach, he wanted to learn. This is all in Berry Gordy's book, which you should read, which is a terrific book. The ultimate thing that he said about Smokey was about his songwriting as they went on from that moment, because they were together from that moment. I mean, that was like they were hitched to the same wagon anyway. But anyway, Barry says, Smokey refused to make any attempt in any way to copy himself. He hated jumping on any bandwagon, even his own. And that's, to me, that is what's, of all those hits that we've mentioned and not mentioned, I'll be doggone and from Marvin and you know, My Guy and My Girl. My Guy and My Girl have nothing in common except their title and the vision of the person behind them. But My Guy, you know, my Guy is out there. It's this kind of sexy, I'm sorry, My Girl is out there. It's this almost mournful love song. And then My Guy comes along, and it's jaunty, but it's, and you know, Mary's singing it like she's found the one. You know, with My Girl, he's found her and he's worried about losing her. And that is how good a writer Smokey is, because that's the difference between guys and girls, isn't it? Girls know, guys hope. Now, if you want to hear, I've been talking about how cohesive this stuff is. If you want to really hear that, to me, there's one Motown production above all that will teach you about Smokey Robinson. And it's not one that he sings on. It's The Temptations Sing Smokey. 12 of his songs, produced 3 massive hit singles, one of which was My Girl. The other 2 were The Way You Do the Things You Do, which was really their breakthrough song. And And that, you know, he always had the greatest opening lines. I got a smile. You got a smile so bright, you know, you could have been a candle. Who could come up with that? But even better is the third of those singles from that album, It's Growing. That thing, that's like biblical parables translated to pop music romantic language. That is it's one of those things. There's a few. My Girl Is Gone. What's the really early one? I'll get it if I look at my list. Way Over There. Way Over There sounds like it's from the Bible to me. You know, I got to love it way over there. It's like Moses pointing across the Red Sea. And that's, you know, it's not, you know, people talk a lot about Smokey's lyrics, and we'll get to that a little more, but it's the synthesis of everything. It's the way it all comes together. And I'll go into that a little bit more, but I want to talk a little bit about Motown in the early days, because things were happening at Motown that did not happen at any other record label anywhere in the United States, and as far as I know, anywhere else in the world. Consider the Miracles themselves, and Claudette's role in the Miracles until she chose to leave to raise their children, which was, you know, for some good reasons. Women at Motown in general were allowed to do things, make records, run departments, you know. You would be hard-pressed to find a more formidable businesswoman in Detroit to this day than Esther Edwards, you know, Smokey's sister. And there's 2 or 3 of his sisters were, his sister Anna was off, you know, working with her husband, Harvey Fuqua, running Anna Records, which was part of the whole thing, but really its own thing. And that's, and you know, right up to the great Suzanne DePass, who was so crucial to the last years of the recording company, and it didn't, and it just didn't. There wasn't any place else where that was happening. And my wife is a music business executive. I know what I'm talking about. That glass ceiling is made of cement to this day. But the other thing about Motown early was how good the records were. And there are, if you've never explored early Motown, say before 65, because there were just a lot of groups of Contours and people like that nobody thinks about anymore, and a lot of artists that you just are not remembered at all. Mitch Ryder put it right. He said, by living in Detroit, we got to test drive the new models. I have people come over to the house, and I just haul out that first Motown. Rhino's got the complete Motown singles, which it runs to theoretically 12 volumes, except there's 12A and 12B. And there's about, believe there's either 5 or 6 discs in each of those sets. God bless Harry Weinger. He'll be here tomorrow. You should do it yourself. So this is the upshot of that for Smokey. By 1965, Smokey was 25 years old. The Miracles had 23 pop chart singles, including 4 in the top 10. They had 17 top 10 hits on the R&B charts. 8 of them were top 10. 2 of them were number 1. And it did take him quite a bit longer to get a number 1 on a pop chart. That was Tears of a Clown. That was 1970. I believe Smokey had written it in 67 or 68. But that was 1970, and he was all of 30. So, you know, we're talking, again, we just go back to, we're talking about an amazing person who is, you know, the Beatles didn't do that. The Beatles were like 6 years and out, right? I mean, they were, I'm not putting the Beatles down, I'm not stupid, but Smokey did great work much longer than the Beatles did. So, and then in 71 or 2, that's the end of the Miracles with Smokey. They got other lead singers. They went on. They had actually quite a bit of success, which makes sense since you know, Pete and Ronnie and even Bobby Rogers had done some writing with Smokey. They knew how to come up with good material, and that's the first step in everything. But starting in 1973, when he's 33 years old, Smokey charted 46 songs. Love Bath was the most recent. That was 2010, when Smokey was a mere 70. 16 top tens, which the last one was in 1990 when he was 50. And 2 number ones, Baby That's Back At You and Being With You. Somehow, even on the R&B charts, Cruisin' only made number 4, which seems to me completely insane. I heard Cruisin' for the first time. I was driving down Santa Monica Boulevard in LA in a big rented car. I keep thinking it was a Cadillac, but it was 1978, and I don't think I could have afforded to even rent a Cadillac in 1978. But anyway, I'm driving down, and all of a sudden this thing comes on. I said, that sounds like Smokey. What is it? It's the greatest car song I've heard since Chuck Berry. You know, I mean, and it really was, and it was that thing, that integrated thing again. It was, the words were exactly the flow. And you know, fortunately I wasn't in a lot of traffic because I probably would have hit somebody, but you know, it was just exactly the right tempo. And he was writing in California then too, you know, he's writing in LA, so I don't know. Then there was a record called Quiet Storm, which only made number 25. All they did with that one was name a radio format for it, which I believe still exists today in some form or another. And what that radio format is about really is trying to find contemporary songs that sound like Smokey Robinson records, you know. And, so, you know, he's something else. He's really, he's not an artifact. I mean, that's part of the reason, and when, if you hear, when we talk on Wednesday, I'm sorry, on Saturday, you'll hear it. He is creativity. That's what he's like. And he loves people, and that comes through in every one of those songs. He loves people. And people have loved him. And well, we should. I can't come back. I can't come back to that too much. You know, that this is somebody, not that everybody that has been chosen for this Music Masters Award has been more than worthy of the honor. They've been, I think the qualification is you have to be very overqualified. But, you know, this is part of it. Smokey is at least superficially an untormented artist. And I don't even care if it's superficial, because what an achievement in a world that admires tortured souls, to say, no, this is my soul, and my soul loves life and loves people and loves love and being in love and loves to dance. All the things that Smokey's songs speak to us about. And speak, you know, another thing to think about My Girl and My Guy is, it's one thing to write My Girl. I don't mean, you know, I had a daughter who died of cancer. And the day after she died, it's colder than hell, it's wintertime, started up the car, finally got it warm enough to pull out of the driveway, made the turn. I've done this 1,000 times, maybe more. We lived there for 30 years. And the first thing I hear on a radio is, I've got sunshine. It was a mile to where I was going. It was made in fits and starts for the next 3 minutes, let me tell you. It's the power of that. But then now think about My Guy. My Guy was written by a guy. And there is no distance between Mary Wells and singing that song, nor does there need to be, on the gender line. I could count all the songwriters I know who can do that in soul music and rock and roll. I don't even think I get to if I start on my left hand, I don't think I get to my right hand. certainly would leave my socks on. Some more about Motown for a minute. It's pretty obvious Smokey's the second most important single figure in the history of the company, which has so many important figures. And we haven't even mentioned the Four Tops, who, the name of this lecture, by the way, I don't think it came up on the board, is Smokey Robinson Saved My Life. And before you get to the end of this, you will see why I say that. But actually, my friend Crispy Hallis, who's here, who's a songwriter and guitar player, he's the only folk music guy I know who loves Smokey Robinson probably more than Bob Dylan. Possibly a lot more. He'll speak for himself if you run into him. And he's the only one who looks like a folk singer in here, so he'd be easy to track down. And he said to me, so I said to him, well, do you want to come down? Because I knew, to Cleveland. He lives up in Detroit. And he said, well, yeah. I said, he saved my life and I didn't even know it. That's the point. He was not engaged in trying to change you. He was engaged in expressing himself and helping the people around him express themselves and trying to make a living. And in doing that in such a powerful way and in such a caring way, your life changed. And you wouldn't be here tonight, I don't think, if there wasn't some moment. Somebody was talking to me about More Love and how that was their mom for them. Maybe it was Chris, I can't remember. How that for their mom, that like really was the definitive Smokey song. Or, if you broke up with somebody, whether you're male or female, my girl has gone and said goodbye. At that point, but it's not a accident that this happened at Motown. There's an idea that, and this is what I really I'm driving at. There's an idea around, you read it in various histories and stuff, that Motown was somehow less black than companies that didn't reach out to white audiences and that didn't employ white employees at significant levels. What a crock of shit. Motown was the blackest label because it reached out to the white audience. Motown was the blackest label because white people had a place in it. Because that is the real story of Black America. And the people who always get that wrong, I'm afraid to say, are us, white people, who, I don't even like saying white people because I don't think there are any white people. I just think, because of white supremacy, it's just not being black. But American culture its foundation is African American culture. And it's the culture of African Americans, whatever they like and whatever they do. You're not in charge of it. They are. That's very much addressed to the white people in the room, including me. Because in my experience, that is a lesson that you will spend the rest of your life learning. And you will relearn it over and over and over again because there are so many reinforcements of white supremacy in our everyday lives. I can remember I worked on the South End newspaper at Wayne State in 1969. It was the daily newspaper of the college. It had been taken over by the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, John Watson and company. And it was great. You know what was great about it? I was one of the few white people there, and there was no chance I was ever going to lead anything. You have no idea the burden that gets released as soon as you make that decision. And we'll talk about my decision and my experience in a little bit. I will talk about that. But, what happens is, white people get terribly caught up in this supposed issue of authenticity. It's a concept that is all trouble and no relief. And start worrying about what's truly black and whether hip hop guys speak. Well, nobody speaks for everybody in any community. That's the single most obvious thing in the world. Try finding some evidence of that in the pop writing on the culture pages, and every place you find it, you will pretty much find a black writer. And, the goal is humanity, and the only way to have humanity is to have a universality. And if one group, whether it's men or white people or rich people, dominates, you cannot have that beautiful visionary thing that I've been talking about with Smokey. And that's what changed my life. But we'll get to it. Let me ask you, let me put it another way to you about Motown, though. What's the only major record company whose artist roster includes 3 albums by Martin Luther King? You think Atlantic Records and Stax Records, whose millions and billions were made mostly on black music, you think it's not them? You think it's Columbia Records and RCA Records, the 2 biggest record companies in the world? Hell no, it's Motown. And they did it consciously because word needed to be spread. And they knew. I thought this when I was 14 and 15 years old, and I think it now, and I'm more certain of it every day. They knew, Berry Gordy knew, Smokey Robinson knew, the rest of them knew, that because Motown was engaged in a project of outreach, more white people would hear that message. And hell, who was the message for? Well, black people already knew what the situation was. Right? It's however, Dr. King, had moments when he spoke intimately to his own community. That's not what's on those records. The speeches he made in Cadillac Square in Detroit, the famous speech in Washington, those kinds of things. Who are those addressed to? Ask yourself that question. Nobody else is going to ask you to ask that question. At least nobody else white that I'm aware of. And I know where I learned it. I learned it from Motown. And this is not a small thing. This is a very, very big thing. Because it speaks back again to this issue of loyalty and allegiance and continuity. And creating a group of artists, a whole roster of artists whose skills were honed and trained. I was at a music conference a few years ago, and we were talking about copyright or the usual stuff. And there's some young kid there. I did something on the internet, probably. Young, like 25, 30. And he happened to say something about Motown not taking care of its artists after they stopped having hits. And Bernice Johnson Reagan from the Nick Freedom Singers and Sweet Honey in the Rock was there. And her daughter, Toshi Reagan, looked at me, and I looked at her. And I took a deep breath, and I said, Bernice, I think I can handle this. and I looked at the kid, and I said, you know something, you go home tonight, I want you to look up and see who's still working. You see, yeah, Aretha's working, Ray Charles working, the Atlantic, you see which other Atlantic Records artists are working. I'm very confident of what I'm saying. I know all those people. The ones that are still alive. I said, but the Motown people are all working, and they're working because they were trained. And they were trained with an eye to the future. They were trained in deportment. Seems funny, but you get in situations, you be the son of a railroad worker who winds up, going to fancy dinners in Paris, and you find out what you don't know pretty fast, no matter what color you are. So they were trained in deportment, they were trained to dance, they were trained to carry themselves a certain way, They worked very hard with one another, honing their musical skills. That's every story that you hear about the company says that. And, you know, that was part of the Motown business model. Now, I'm famous for saying that there is no business model in the record industry that doesn't involve stealing from the artist as its fundamental precept. But I would say Motown gave more back to its artists than any other record company, and it never gets credit for it. Never. And Smokey was part of that. Smokey was an executive vice president, or I think that was his highest title. He was, you know, he was the guy who said, you know, Smokey says one thing in his book that's much more modest, but Barry Gordy in his autobiography says that what happened was Barry got this royalty check for $3.19 for one of the first Miracles records. And Smokey said, well, you know, Barry, maybe you should start a record label. I don't think you could do any worse than this. So, you know, Smokey was the first artist to sign with Joe Bett, the Motown publisher, the first Motown publishing company. And so, you know, that's, you know, they drove in a blizzard together. This is a famous story, is that they drove in a blizzard together. They had Barry signed an artist named Marv Johnson, who had the first release on Tamla, which came before Motown. And the Miracles were always on Tamla when I was a kid. A record called Come to Me that was actually a big hit. But the record had been pressed up in a town called Owasso, which is way over in central Michigan, where it gets real cold in the wintertime. And so they got a pickup truck so they could put all the records in the back, and they drove up in a blizzard and ended up in two ditches, one on the way up and one on the way back. You know, and that was Smokey riding shotgun, and that's sort of a paradigm of how Smokey worked within that Motown community, you know. So let's talk about Smokey's voice. You know, there's a writing voice that people talk about a lot, and then there's a singing voice that people talk about a little less. And another quote from Robert Christgau about the voice, because I thought it was just really good. He never aspired to the complete clarity that was the direction of his doo-wop influence's style of artifice. Even at his most mellow, he always suggested the hint of a burr of pain underneath. Yet at the same time, he was always a little breathy, so fresh and boyish. Boy, that's really right. That it was impossible to accuse him of self-pity. He rounded out his act with happy dance routines and advice songs, working with energetic good cheer to make other people happy, while taking upon himself the twists and turns of heartbreak we had all suffered. Or as Nick Cohn put it, sometimes it's a cry of pure pain, and sometimes it's only a sigh. Either way, it would like to break your heart. That's what I hear too, more or less. Everybody's got their own feeling about it, because this is the magic, okay? Because it comes out of one guy and then maybe 4 or 5 other people that are singing it and the musicians who are playing it, and somehow it hits 1 million people, and they know exactly what it means in the most private sorts of parts of their heart. So to me, the other thing that Smokey songs sound like, because of the way that they integrate everything, the flow of them, they sound inevitable. They sound like he was walking down the side of a stream and he just reached in and he pulled out this rock that just happened to be shaped by the water running over it for 45 million years, and it came out as, you know, the tracks of my tears, or Mickey's Monkey, or I Gotta Dance to Keep from Crying. You know, they sound, but they don't sound like an accident. They just sound inevitable. And that's a big, you know, thing. And one of the reasons for that is the way that those words rework ordinary vernacular language, the way we speak to one another, even sometimes cliches. I'll be doggone. Perfect. Pride and joy. And that is art. That is an artistic thing to be able to do, to take language and make it swim in a melody that makes the most cliched thought gem-like. It isn't, of course, the most cliched thought, but go try to pull it off sometime. It isn't easy. It's the British writer Michael Gray, well, actually only writes about Bob Dylan, says, the fusions of words and melody made it sound as if the two sprang unbounded without effort from one clear fountain of adept and sassy invention. Can't say it much better than that. Now, there is this story that goes around that Bob Dylan said that Smokey was America's greatest living poet. And I thought, as part of this, I should set the record straight on this. On December 3rd, 1965, Bob Dylan did a press conference in San Francisco, which was broadcast, believe it or not, live on the local KQED, which was a local public television station. Not like it was over the air. This is the old days when public television actually meant public. And Ralph Gleason, who had done a bunch of jazz shows, got Dylan to do this. And at some point, someone, and it sounds to me, listening back to the recording this week like it was Ralph, says, "What poets do you dig?" Very Ralph Gleason sentence. And there's a long pause. And Bob says, well, Rimbaud, W.C. Fields, the Trapeze family, at the circus? He meant the Flying Melendez, I think. And then he gets real confident. He says, Smokey Robinson, Allen Ginsberg, and Charlie Rich. And nobody laughs. Now, thanks, as far as I can figure out, what happens next is that this gets around a bit and it gets, and then Al Abrams, who was Motown's ace PR man at around that 1965 kind of point, which was sort of maybe the first real pinnacle of the company. He decided that it could be rendered better as Smokey Robinson is America's greatest living poet. And so that's, well, actually, I was going to say, that's what Bob said is more interesting. And it is in a way because it places Smokey along some renowned poets, and which is what, and then, but before he does that, of course, what Bob does, because he's smarter than the guy who asked the question, is he emphasizes the absurdity of the question. And on the other hand, I got thinking about Smokey when I was thinking about this, and I said, well, wait a minute. And I got thinking about Tears of the Clown. I said, well, how many other songwriters are there in the history of American music in the rock and soul period who actually knew who Pagliacci was? That's Smokey, and not only do you have to know who Pagliacci was, you have to be able to compare your condition to his condition. That's, that means you finished, well, you can't, the libretto anyway. But then that's the same guy who thought of coming up with Sabotage for a rhyme, for a rhyme and a love song with Mirage. And nobody else is going to do that. Bob Dylan couldn't have done that one. But what Al Abrams said was what stuck. Why? Well, first of all, because not very many people have heard what Dylan actually said. I have it on a bootleg, of course. But also because it's so difficult to think of a reason it isn't true. I mean, these aren't Hallmark greeting card lyrics. These are things that are important to people's lives, and the person who created them to be important in people's lives, and you can hear that. I'm not arguing with anybody here. Might be some people outside the room, but, who knows, maybe somebody's recording it. But like I said, maybe I'm a Smokey Robinson fan. But then I think about, I was actually doing a thing called the Book of Rock Cliffs once, and we asked Allen Ginsberg for his favorite blues songs, and the first one he listed was James Alley Blues by Richard Rabbit Brown, who only made about 3 other songs. He says, times ain't nothing, baby, like they used to be. But then later on, he says, I wash the clothes and I pay the rent. She wants me to do the dishes, but I got good common sense. That's Smokey. And that is the blues. So, you know, Smokey has his themes: romance, sex, dance, faithfulness, the price of mistakes, which is that's where you move from comedy to either tragedy or the tragicomic. There's a song of his called A Fork in the Road that might be the greatest and most tragic breakup song that anybody in this era ever wrote. Just a great, great song. I don't think it was ever a single. It certainly never charted. And if you don't know that one, you should go listen to it, and I'll be around all weekend. You can quarrel with me. What you get here is the power of love combined with the power of close observation. And I think something that, and I know something that he learned at Berry Gordy's side, which is the power of story. Story told in the compressed language of song, with at least as much of the tale coming from the playing and singing as from the words. In other words, the words, because this gets into this whole thing about whether rock songwriter, lyric writers are, or you know, whether Bob Dylan's a poet or not. Well, you know, it may be really good without the music, but it's not as good. And I'm up here spouting Smokey lyrics. Well, I could go play one of his records for 45 seconds and you'd learn more because you'd hear it all. And again, coming back to the you know, the universality not only of his message but of his technique, where he's in charge of the production, the writing, and often the performance, and certainly is guiding the performance. So, the songs meant everything he was conscious of, and the best of them, which is a very long list, I mean, a lot of those songs that I mentioned earlier, they also meant everything you were conscious of. And the story I want to tell as I wind this thing down is a story about how they make you conscious of much more than you thought you were conscious of. There are songs in this repertoire that some of the people here, and certainly me, may have heard 1,000 times on purpose. And there's a reason we keep coming back to them. So there's a song called You Really Got a Hold on Me, which the Beatles did also. And this is where Smokey changed my life, was with that record 4 years after it was a hit. I wrote a whole long essay about this. I actually have it all here. Fortunately, I did talk, as Lauren Anke predicted, I did talk long enough not to have to read the whole thing. She said we'd do it as an interview. She asked me one question and that'd take care of all the time. The story I wrote is in a book called Fortunate Son, and the essay is called Fortunate Son. It's the introduction. It's the one piece I've ever written that's most collected academically, which is both, I'm very proud of that and amused by it. I think Smokey is too. It's about me growing up in Pontiac, Michigan, and moving eventually from the city to the suburbs. Partly because General Motors was tearing down our neighborhood to build a parking lot, and partly because there weren't any black people in the suburbs. And my whole life, what was preached to me up to the point I was 14, when I began to preach to myself, with a little help from Smokey, a lot of help from Smokey, and then a few other people too, but all of our problems as working class people, as poorer people, as white people even. White people experience whiteness as a burden, but not the right kind of, I mean, whiteness is a burden. You know, is carrying 50,000 pounds of lies on your back every day of the week. But that's not, that's not the burden that they think. They think there's a different burden, and that burden is a burden of lies. That is, it's 50,000 pounds of lies. And so what happened to me is I started listening to radio a lot. And the reason I started listening to radio a lot was because there was a city councilman in Detroit named Milton. My memory is shot. Milton Henry. And Milton Henry might be familiar to some people in this area because he was involved with a great deal of things in the civil rights movement. He's one of those people who was associated with both Martin Luther King and with Malcolm X and the Republic of New Africa, if you know that. And this was 1963 and 1964. And so they began to cover. He was making demands. He wanted the schools to be integrated. He wanted housing to be integrated. He wanted elementary justice for the black community as well as the white community. Betty LaVette, the great singer, Betty lived 2 miles from me. And I would be willing to bet you that I was never in the neighborhood where she left more than 2-3 times in my life, and that only because my godfather owned a liquor store over there. And that if Betty had come to my neighborhood, which was nicknamed Pontucky because of the preponderance of Southern immigrants who lived there, white Southern immigrants, Betty and me both have been in a lot of trouble. And in fact, I'm very confident of this because she thinks so too. So I got interested in these issues, but I didn't know what to do with them. And, everything that anybody was telling me was that all of our problems came from black people. It didn't seem right, but how could it be wrong? My teachers are telling it to me. Forget about my old man who was a nut on the subject, but I grew up in the town where eventually, the small town in central Michigan, where eventually the plot for Oklahoma City was laid, and the bombs may have been made by my cousins and second cousins. So there was a trap. And if you stepped in the trap, you were gone. You weren't getting back out of that trap. I don't know how I knew that. Well, I do know how I knew it. There was some resistance. One reason we left Pontiac was because I had black friends in school, because I was going to an integrated junior high school. And I know that that's one reason that we left. And it wasn't going to elude me, though, the hate, no matter who I made friends with. That never works that way, White people have the illusion that their bigotry and the oppressive systems that they support somehow are an insurance for their souls. There is no insurance for your souls. You are not what you say you are what you do, and you are not what you do at the best of times, but that you are what you do in the sum of all your time. Well, I loved rock and roll. I was lucky. I had a aunt. My mother had 10 sisters, and the youngest of them was only 7 years older than me. And my Aunt Barbara, she got me listening to Jackie Wilson and Little Willie John and watching American Bandstand, listen to Elvis. I'm not pretending that all I listened to was black music, although pretty close a lot of the time afterwards. Anyway, this one night, there was an oldies show on WPON in Pontiac, and I'm up in this bunk bed in the bedroom my brother and I shared, listening to this music, and this voice comes on. And what it says is, I don't like you, but I love you. Seems like I'm always thinking of you. And I knew that that was Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, and I had seen them on television. And I don't know, you listen to that song, you may take it for granted. From that day forward, I have never taken it for granted. Because what got me, I've thought about this for years and trying to figure out, well, how could it have that power over me? I really did. You know, why that song? Why that singer? Why me? And the answer is because it's so goddamn beautiful. And it was aimed. I believe Smokey's like the sweetest guy you'll ever meet. He really does want your heart to break. It's good for you. And that night it got to me, and the one thing I knew at the end of that record was whoever sang that song, whatever they looked like, whatever they were not inferior to me. And I hoped, I'm serious about this, I hoped that at some point in my life, I could be worthy of them and of what they sounded like. I've been thinking about writing a memoir, but that's really all there is to say. You know? The rest is just elaboration on the point. Is you find something. It may be very, very simple. It may be just laying there like a shiny object in the road, and you pick it up and turn it around, and it just blasts your soul. And it saves your life. And you've got a chance. That's all that having your life saved means, is now you got a chance. Now you can see through it. And I got down out of that bed, and I walked through my parents' house, and it was a different world. I sound like I was just baptized, right? And it wasn't like that. It was very practical. I knew I had things to do in the world that mattered. And I knew that someone did, so could I. Not the same thing, but something. Now, I don't think you really got a hold on me. It's the greatest song Smokey Robinson or anybody else ever wrote. I don't think it's the greatest record he ever made. In fact, I pretty much know it isn't. But for me, and I can't be the only one, it was that epiphany that whether you believe in God or not, that if you have any sense of self-preservation, you pray for, that the greatest illusions will be lifted from your eyes and your heart, and you will begin to see and feel as the full human being you really are. And that is Smokey Robinson's gift. And the fact that he once told me that he liked that I said those things means, well, it means a lot. Now, I thought of a number of ways to end this, but when I was rereading Berry Gordy's book, I came across a song that Smokey wrote for Berry when Berry was being honored one night at by the Brotherhood Crusade, a charity in California that I know nothing else about. And it was apparently a great debacle because it sounds like actually a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame award ceremony. It was running several hours late, And Smokey was the culminating artist, and he's Barry's best friend. And the first thing he does is pantomime the drive to Owasso, which only Barry in the room understands what the hell he's doing. And then he starts to sing, and he sings all the hits. Because this is his best friend. And this is a guy who saved his life. Ask him. And Barry's debating with himself about whether he can just go up and say, Smokey, gotta stop. And finally, Smokey goes into it and says, well, you know, I got a song I wrote for you. To Barry. And the last, and Barry reprints the words in the book, so I want to dedicate everything I've said tonight with these words. If I can get through them. Did you know all the joy you'd be bringing? Did you know you'd be the whole world singing? Did you know when you dreamed your dream that it would make so many dreams come true? Thank you, Smokey. Have we got time to take some questions still?
We have time for questions if you just come up and use the mic. And then afterward, there's a reception right outside, so please don't leave without having something. But please, come on up.
Oh, I'm getting off early. I can punch out. All right. Well, thank you. I hope people will come up and say hello afterwards. I hope I didn't bore you. Thanks.